Masechet Pesachim, page 77. We're discussing today communal sacrifices that are eaten. What if it's the most of the community is tameh? What do we do with these sacrifices? That's the Mishnah. Will mention 5 offerings that are in this category. So they can be brought tumah, but they cannot be eaten by Kohanim. And then, since it says 5, what does it exclude and what does it include? We'll see the source for this is from the word moed. We'll see a few different places where it says that. And then the main section will be kind of a logical puzzle based on the following 3 assumptions. So kind of like these three hypotheses. If we assume them, we see that they cannot all work together. And so then we're going to have 3 different answers to try to resolve how to work these together and whether to be Yehoshua can be the author of our Mishnah. All right, so that's what we have coming up. Mishnah states, "Chamisha devarim ba'im betumah ve'enan ne'echalin betumah." There are 5 different offerings that are brought bitumah, and when most of the community is tameh, nevertheless, we still offer these sacrifices. We already know from before that this is true for Pesach and Korban Tamid. Korban Tamid has to be brought every day, right? And it says b'mo'ado, so we bring it even if most people are tameh. And Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach, however, even when people are tameh, we bring it and we eat it, as we'll see in a second. The following are not in that category because they should be eaten, not like Tamid, but they're not eaten, so that's not like Pesach. What are they? Ha'omed, the omed that we bring on Pesach so that we can start eating the barley. Usually it's waved and the Kohanim eat the omed. In this case, you'll bring the omed and wave it, but do not eat it because everybody's tameh. Shtei lechem, that's on Shavuot. You bring the 2 loaves on Shavuot and then the beginning of the wheat. That can be brought, but not eaten as usual. Lechem apanim, the weekly loaves, showbread, that usually the Kohanim would eat. So you still bring them when everyone's tameh, but you don't eat them. These are the communal offerings that are brought on Shavuot together with lechatehilah. So those are communal offerings, and so we will bring them, but not eat them as we usually would. Sin offerings that are brought on Rosh Chodesh. When everyone is tameh, when everyone's tahor, you would eat the Kohanim would eat them. If everyone's tameh, you still bring them, but you don't eat them. So that's it. Those are the 5. What's left out is other things that are brought on other holidays, different chatat offerings that would be eaten. How come the Mishnah doesn't mention them? The Gemara will include them. Okay. HaPesach sheba betumah ne'echal betumah shelo ba lechatehilah ela la'achila. Korban Pesach, however, is when everyone is tameh. You bring the Korban Pesach bitumah, and that's also eaten bitumah, because the whole point of the Korban Pesach is that it should be brought to be eaten. And so there's no point in bringing it if you're not going to eat it. That's part of the essence of the Korban Pesach. Not so for the other 5, where you're bringing them for atonement, for permitting the new barley, the new grain, and so they're not meant only for eating. They have other purposes, and therefore they are brought and not eaten. Okay, so those are the 5. Anytime the Mishnah mentions a number, the Gemara asks, "Hachamisha lemeot." Why do you have to say these are the 5? Just list them. I can count for myself. So number 5 must be coming to hint that there's something else that you might have thought would be on the list, but is not. And that is a Hagigah that you bring on the 15th day of Nisan. And so that is a communal sacrifice, and it's generally eaten. So I would have thought that I would bring it. It's a korban sibur, and it has a set date, 15th of the month, and it's eaten. So I would have thought that I should bring that also and just not eat it. Yes, it's true. It should be brought on the 15th, but if not, if you couldn't bring it on the 15th, for example, let's say 15th is Shabbat. We don't violate Shabbat for Hagigah. And so then you'd bring it another day of the holiday. So you see, it's supposed to be that day, but it doesn't have to be that day. Similarly, just like Shabbat is not overridden for this Korban Hagigah, so too we're not going to override tumah for it, right? Just become tahor and wait a few days. So it doesn't have to be only on that date, and that's what the number 5 is coming to exclude. Okay, now we've excluded that. We want to include other holidays. All the holidays have other se'idim, right? Goats brought as sin offerings. Why not include those? And they're also communal. They're also usually eaten. So and have to be on those holidays. We say, well, we did mention them. The Mishnah mentions the 2 se'idim that we bring on Shavuot, together with the shtei halechem, and so that's a representative. It only mentioned one of them, but it includes. It's the same for all the other holidays. Okay, so they are there. All right. Okay, if you're telling me that it just mentioned one, but that one includes all the different seidim of different holidays, then don't mention Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Chodesh is also a holiday, right? And so just include that Rosh Chodesh within Zibchei Shel Sibur, all of them, and that include all the holidays and Rosh Chodesh. So if from the fact that it mentioned Rosh Chodesh specifically, sounds like right only that specifically that and only Shavuot and only Rosh Chodesh, not other holidays. Tatana Zibchei Shel Sibur. Amre. Seirera shechodashim istericha le sakadetecha mina ha la ketibehu moed. Oh, no, I need to mention Rosh Chodesh specifically because I might have thought that it's not called moed. It's not as explicit. Other moedim, the other regalim, are specifically called moedim. So it's obvious that if it says the Shavuot, Seidim of Shavuot, then all the others would include it. But it's not obvious that Rosh Chodesh is a standard moed. Therefore, the Mishnah mentions both Shavuot, that includes all the holidays, and Rosh Chodesh, just in case you don't think that's a moed, it is a moed, but it has to be specified. Where do we, in fact, see that Rosh Chodesh is called a moed? Well, you're not going to find it in the Torah, but you'll find it in Echa. Kede Abaye, based on the midrashic understanding of this pasuk, Tamar Abaye, Tamuz Dahai Shata Maloye Maleyu. We're talking about this certain year, the year when Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim and the spies went into Israel, and they came back and they had the bad report, and then we realized then that decree that they're not going to go in, and everybody was crying. Or rather, they were crying when they heard the spies' report, and that happened on Tisha B'Av, as the tradition says, and that was a precedent, and Tisha B'Av became that ominous day. So because they did that day, that's why future things also happened on Tisha B'Av. Okay, now if you try to figure out the calendar, if the Tammuz beforehand is 29 days, then the day that the spies go up would come back would actually be the 10th of Av, and so that gets the wrong day. Therefore, Abaye says it must be that in that year they decided to make Tammuz 30 days, and that's where the calendar works. And he supports it with the pasuk Tichtib Kara Alai Moed Lishbor Bachurai. They called upon me Moed. So Moed here refers to Rosh Chodesh. In other words, that they proclaimed Rosh Chodesh to be an extra a day later, in order to crush my young men, in order to establish this day as a day of mourning. So there you go. In this pasuk, according to Abaye's understanding, Moed refers to Rosh Chodesh. So that's how we know Moed refers to Rosh Chodesh. But this is kind of roundabout. So the Mishnah had to specify Rosh Chodesh in order, because you wouldn't always necessarily assume otherwise that it's included in all the other seidim of other holidays. Okay, so we saw the 5 items, and we excluded the Hagigah, the 50th of Nisan, and we included all the other holiday musafin, the other seidim. Okay, we saw that the word moed is the key term here. So now we're going to look for all the places where it says moed and try to figure out, like, why do we need all of them? Why can't we learn one from the other? How do we know that this whole concept that you can bring betumah, we learned from the word moed? So pasuk and parashat Emor and Vayikra, right? What is this teaching? b'moado, v'afilu b'shabbat b'moado, afilu b'tumah. Okay, way back before we saw, remember the story with Hillel and Bnei Betera? Over there we saw that midrash that says the word b'moado twice regarding Korban Pesach and Shabbat. And from that fact, we can derive each one from the other, that you bring Korban Pesach and Korban Tamid on Shabbat, and you bring both of them when most of the community is tameh. Fine, we know those two cases, but what about everything else? Shad Korbanot Sibur Minayin, other communal offerings, not individual offerings. Individual offerings are not brought when anyone is tameh, or everyone is tameh. Shene'emar ele ta'asul Adonai b'mo'adechem. Okay, this is not the pasuk in Vayikra. This is pasuk in Pinechas. So pasuk in Pinechas teaches that other korbanot sibur will be brought on Shabbat and when most people are tameh, because it says the word there b'mo'adechem. Fine. So now we know that. Minayin l'rabot omer v'kareb imo. But what's missing in Parashat Pinechas is the omer and the sacrifices that are brought with the omer. Right, we bring a couple of sacrifices with it. And you also bring a couple of shelamim together with the lechatehilah. Those are not mentioned in Pinechas. So how do I know that the communal offerings, that they would be brought even on Shabbat and also when people are tameh? So that's what the pasuk in Vayikra is coming to teach, that these are moadim, and it mentions there the omer and shtei alechem, and so there, and says moed. So now I know that those also are brought on Shabbat or when most people are tameh. Hakatub kebal moed echad lechulan. Okay, good. So now I have 4 sets of pesukim. They all have the word moed, and each one comes to teach something else. Tamid, korban pesach, the musafin of all the holidays, and the korbanot that are brought with the omer and the lechatehilah. So we have 4 different contexts. And now the question is, why do I need all 4? Just teach me one of them, and then that could be the precedent for the others. We're going to go through every possibility and show what is more stringent or special about each case, that I wouldn't be able to learn it from the others. The korban tamid you bring every single day, so it's very frequent and it's entirely consumed as an olah. Aval pesach la kamashmalan, pesach is only brought once a year, and it's not an olah, not entirely consumed. So you have to tell me that that korban pesach I might think is less stringent. So therefore I have to say, yes, we're going to korban pesach also b'mo'ado. And if he only had said it regarding Pesach, I would say, Pesach can be brought on Shabbat and when people are tameh, because as a strict punishment of karet, but korban tamid, if you don't do korban tamid, you don't get karet. So therefore it's less. So I wouldn't necessarily learn from Pesach to tamid. That's why I need both of those. וכתב רחמנא הנה תרתי, הווה אמינא הנה הוא יש בהן סד חמור, תמיד תדיר וחליל פסח שהוא אנוש וכרת, אבל שאר קורבנות ציבור מעלה. If I had only these 2 contexts of Pesach and Tamid, so each of these have their own special stringencies, but I wouldn't know that all other korbanot tzibur, right, other musafim of the holidays are not as regular, and they don't have karet, so I wouldn't know to learn from those 2 contexts to this one. And therefore, pasuk in Pinechas has to teach, yes, also the korbanot of the holidays. And if I had all those, lechaper, aval omer u'shtei alechem de'en banin lechaper, ela tib'amanin hu la kamash malan. If I had all those, I would say, yeah, it's true. Only korban tzibur whose purpose is to atone, which is all the musafin, those can override Shabbat and tumah. But the omer and shtei alechem, they're not brought to atone, but rather to permit that from then on you're permitted to eat from the chadash. But so it's less important. I mean, this is we want to eat from the new grain, but it's not it's optional technically, right? It's not as important as atonement. So I might not know that those would violate Shabbat. that those would override Shabbat and tumah. And if it only said the word moed regarding omer and shtei alechem, as it says in Parashat Emor, lechudayu hava amina ad rabba omer shtei alechem de'alimi de'ba'inatir aval hanachla kamashmalan. I might have thought maybe because those are strong because they permit the new grain. That's very important, so everybody can eat the new grain. Otherwise, what are they going to eat? But the other ones are not. Don't cause a change in status in anything in the world. They get atonement, but not a change in status in what we can do. And so I wouldn't necessarily learn from Omer to all the other cases. Kamash Malan. That's why the Torah has to say the word moed in all four different contexts to teach me that in all these communal sacrifices, the law is that they can override Shabbat and they can override tumah when most people are tameh.
Rabbi,
okay. Yep.
Is this essentially an extension of the original Gezerah Shavah?
Right, b'mo'ado, that's a very good point. Right, the original Gezerah Shavah, and you find it in Tanaitic sources, is the specific word b'mo'ado, which occurs only in those two contexts. And here now we're expanding it to the other forms of moed, and that does appear in lots of other places. So yeah, that's a great point.
So when you mentioned earlier that in Tanaitic sources, Gezerah Shavah is only when the word is exact. So is it possible that in this case there's a different Tanaitic source for why these other korbanot are?
That's a good question. I didn't check if there are other Tanaitic sources that mention these other ones. Right, but yeah, it looks like the Bavli is systematizing and bringing all the different ones together. Yeah, that's a good thing to look up. Okay, so now we're going to get to the logic exercise section, and basically it's going to work as follows. If we understand it here, then it'll be much easier to read it inside. Okay, so there's three basic assumptions. One is that you need the frontlet. The seats of the Kohen Gadol has a very specific function that it atones for tumah. If someone brings tumah into the Bet HaMikdash by mistake, then the frontlet will atone and say, that it can be, now even on purpose, when most of the community is tameh, and we say, oh, it's still okay, you can bring the Korban Pesach and Tamid and the Seirim and so on. Why is that? Is it hutra? That's one opinion we're going to see of the Yehuda, that when most people are tameh, then it's permitted and you don't need to atone for it. But that's a minority opinion. The majority opinion says it overrides, but you still need to atone for the tumah that you brought in, right? The Korban Tamid or Pesach or Seirim are still tameh and still cause a problem, and you need the seats there to atone for that tumah, even for those communal sacrifices that you are allowed to bring. So that's assumption number one, that you need atonement with the frontlet. Assumption number two is that the seats does not atone for eaten parts of the korban, only parts of the korban that go on the mizbeach. So that would be fine for a korban tamid. It all goes on the mizbeach, and so that will be totally atoned for. But a korban that's partly eaten, like chatat, shalamim, those would be a problem because they wouldn't be fully atoned for. That's assumption number two. And number three is we're focusing on the Yehoshua. He has an opinion that blood and meat are mutually independent. If I can't sprinkle the blood, then I cannot sacrifice or eat the meat. And if I can't sacrifice or eat the meat, then I can't sprinkle the blood. Both of them have to be available and usable in order for the entire sacrifice to go ahead. Okay, so now these three things don't all work together with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is talking about items that are korbanot that are eaten. Part of them are eaten, and they're going to be brought betumah. So since they need atonement, right? They're allowed to bring them, but they need the seats to atone for it. But the seats only atones for parts that are not eaten, that are put on the mizbeach, not for those parts that are eaten. And so now, since all these korbanot have a section that is eaten by the Kohen, so this will be a problem for the Yehoshua's rule, since the blood and the meat are mutually dependent, and the meat, which is supposed to be eaten, will not be atoned for because the frontlet doesn't atone for them. And so there, that tumah is a problem. Therefore, then the blood also cannot be offered because the meat is not atoned for. So for korban tamid, it's okay because there the frontlet atones for, there's no eaten parts, so the frontlet atones for all of them. But these korbanot that are eaten, right, the Yehoshua cannot work with both assumptions A and B and agree with the Mishnah. So that's the problem we're going to have to solve to figure out how the Yehoshua might be reconciled with the Mishnah and both of these assumptions. We're going to see three.
Sorry, are we going to say that Rabbi Yehoshua doesn't follow that opinion you mentioned, that it's hutra and it's not, and it doesn't need the atonement?
No, we're not gonna go against assumption A. We will try to go against assumption B. And we're going to or limit assumption C. So the first answer will be that even though the parts that are eaten are not atoned for, but the parts that go on to the parts that are eaten by the altar, right? So they do go to the mizbeach, and that's sufficient. When he said this rule, blood and meat, he didn't mean all the meat. Even if only some of the meat goes on the mizbeach, that will be atoned for, and then the blood is fine, even though some of the meat cannot be eaten, and that's enough. So that works for most of the cases, but that answer does not work for the menahot, because the menahot that are brought are like the moed, those are entirely eaten. And so there's nothing that goes on the mizbeach. So what is we going to say about that? So then instead to answer that, we're going to say must be he disputes B. The frontlet doesn't atone for eaten parts. No, it does. The frontlet does atone even for eaten parts. Okay, so that would be maybe a second. The first answer doesn't really work. So this is the second answer, or the first one that works. And then we're going to have a problem with that. We're going to reject that also. So the next answer will be that the Mishnah is only talking about bediabad. You shouldn't really do that. The whole Mishnah is only talking about if you did it already, fine. And C is his opinion, lechatehilah. Do not do this. Do not offer the blood if the meat is not all tahor. If you did it, it's fine, but don't do it. Really, the Mishnah doesn't sound like it's talking about bediabad. And so we'll end up with a last answer, which is that the Mishnah is talking about public sacrifices, and Rabbi Yehoshua, and he said this was only talking about private sacrifices, and so it really does not apply at all to the entire category. And so that would be a very broad solution that would make everything fit together. All right, so I hope that was clear, because that will help us as we go through the details. Sebaru, right? We're going to start with this assumption. That everyone agrees that tumah dechuya, not hutra, tumah is not permitted, but is overridden. Even though it's overridden, the tumah is still there and needs to be atoned. Or that's number one. And second, and you need the Kohen's front plate in order to atone for that tum'ah. Okay, so let's see. Delekatana, where do we see these assumptions? Delekatana de shamat le damar tumah utra besibur ella lebiuda. Well, the only person who ever said hutra, that's totally permitted, and you don't need to atone for the tumah when most people are tameh, is lebiuda. Where do we see his opinion? De tanya sis. Ben sheyeshno al mischo, ben sheno mischo medaseh. Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says just the existence of the seats is okay. It doesn't actually have to be on the Kohen Gadol. He doesn't have to be wearing it at the time. As long as it's somewhere, that's sufficient. Rabbi Yehuda omer odehu al mischo medaseh, and odeh mischo eno medaseh. Rabbi Yehuda says no, he has to actually be wearing it at the time that the korban is brought in order for it to be okay. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon, Kohen Gadol b'yom kippurim yochiach she'eno mischo u'medaseh. Right, the Kohen Gadol does not wear the seats all day on Yom Kippur, and so he's not wearing the seats, and then it will not atone during that time. So so you see that he doesn't have to be wearing it. No, don't worry about Yom Kippur. Here's where he says it, right? The tumah is permitted. If there should be any kind of tumah on Yom Kippur or whatever, don't worry, hutra, and you don't need the seats at all. so that it's because it's hutra. So Rabbi Yehuda says it at least regarding Yom Kippur. Maybe he says it other places. Miklal that Rabbi Shimon sabat tumah dechuyahi besibur, but Rabbi Shimon says no, it's only dechuya all the time and not hutra. Okay, so now actually this Baraita only brought two opinions, but nevertheless we assume that the everyone says that it's dechuya besibur, and Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yehuda is the only one that says hutra. We assume everyone else is not like that. Okay. And everyone also agrees that the seats does not atone for something that's eaten by the Kohanim. Because no Tana thinks that this is true except for the Rabbi Eliezer. So there is one person that says it. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer omer hasis meraseh al achilot. Rabbi Yosef omer en hasis meraseh al achilot. Right, that's explicit machloket in the Braita. Rabbi Eliezer says that the seats will atone for things that are eaten. Rabbi Yosef says not so. Okay, truth is we only have two opinions here. Yet you see that the Gemara is trying to establish a general principle and may say there's only one person to be Eliezer, and therefore makes an assumption that everyone agrees with Rabbi Yosef. You could have equally done the opposite, but it's evident that the Gemara wants to present the following hypotheses, maybe because in the end halacha is like Rabbi Yosef, so we want to try to fit together these majority opinions with Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, so now with those two assumptions, okay, this pasuk we're going to analyze a lot. So let's read the whole thing. When you make an olah, you have to bring the basar, the meat, vehadam. So you see that these go together, basar and dam. Al mizbach Adonai Elohecha. And then the second half of the pasuk says, ve'dam zebechecha yishafech. When you bring the blood, it should be poured on the mizbeach, on the side of the mizbeach. Al mizbach Adonai Elohecha ve'habasar tochel, and the meat will be eaten. Depending on what it says, this is an olah. So eaten means eaten by the mizbeach. Okay, so the second half of the pasuk kind of goes into more detail, right? The first half says basar v'adam, you're putting on the mizbeach, and then dam zebechecha yishafech. So that gets poured, habasar tochal, and that gets burnt. Okay, so here's how Rabbi Yehoshua interprets the beginning of the pasuk. Asita otecha basar v'adam, Rabbi Yehoshua omer, im en dam and basar, im en basar and dam. They are mutually dependent, right? Because it says basar v'hadam, so they both have to be available and able to be sprinkled and offered, right? If it gets lost or not unfit, one of them does, then the other also you have to stop. You cannot sprinkle it. Okay, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer, okay, that's going to be the basis of our question, right? As we presented it before. If in fact you have to basar v'adam are interdependent, and in these cases some of the basar is eaten by kohanim, and the seats does not atone for anything that's eaten by kohanim, then you have a problem because that portion of the meat is not atoned for, and if that's not atoned for, then the blood cannot be offered. So then these entire things, all 5 items mentioned in the Mishnah, cannot be brought when bitumah. So Rabbi Yehoshua, with those assumptions above, cannot agree with the Mishnah. That's our question on Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, before we answer the question, we're going to go into a lengthy discussion of how Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer interpret this pasuk, because they have to account for every phrase in it, and even though they disagree. Rabbi Eliezer omer dam afal pi she'en basar. No, you can bring the blood, even if there's something happened with the meat and it became unfit. Don't worry about it. You can still bring the blood, and the offering will be an atonement. So he learns it from the second half of the pasuk that says dam zebechecha yishafech, independent of basar. See, there you go. It is independent. Okay, what about Rabbi Eliezer? What are you going to do with the first half of the pasuk where basar and dam are mentioned together? That's to teach you that just like when you offer the blood, you throw it from the bowl onto the side of the mizbeach. So too, the meat, when you bring it to the mizbeach, you should not place it on the fire, but rather throw it. And so that's what they did. There was actually a gap between the ramp and the mizbeach itself. And you can step over the gap. They'd have to go up there to range the fire and clean up and all that. But when they're bringing the meat, the sacrificial meat up, they would stand before the gap and throw it onto the fire. And so that's there's a parallel between throwing the blood on the side of the altar and throwing it on throwing the meat onto it. And that's what we learned from the beginning of the pasuk, that they are equivalent in that way. Okay, Have Omer Lul Katan Yesh Ben Kebesh Lamizbeach, and this is what we learned, that there is a small gap between the ramp and the mizbeach for this very reason, as a reminder. Okay, stop here and then throw it. All right, so that's how to be Eliezer, and deals with both halves of the pasuk. And now have it be Yoshua namevaketiv dam zevechecha yishafech. The Yehoshua, doesn't the second half of the pasuk talk about dam and sprinkling the dam by itself? Wait a second, look at the end of the pasuk, right? And the end of the pasuk, so there you go, they're together. When do you sprinkle the blood? Only when the meat can also be eaten by the mizbeach. So they go together. But now we have a new question for the Yehoshua. Why do I need to repeat the same thing twice? The first half of the pasuk says basar vadam. The second half of the pasuk mentions dam first and then basar. Okay, but you interpreted both the same way. That seems redundant. Answer: Chad be'olah, v'chad be'shelamim. We need to teach you that this is true for both olah and shelamim. They're mutually independent, the blood and the meat. If it only said it regarding olah, I might have said maybe it only applies to olah because it's more stringent. Because it's all entirely burnt. But shalamim is not as stringent, so I would say in shalamim, yeah, you could do the blood or the meat separately. If it only said shalamim, I might have said that one is more stringent because as two types of eating. Part of it is eaten by the kohanim, and part or the owners. Part of it is eaten by the mizbeach, and so since it says two kinds of eating, there you have to be more stringent and make sure that the blood and the meat. But maybe regarding olah that doesn't have that, might not say so. So that's why, yeah, it's not redundant. I need both halves of the pasuk to teach me the same law for different kinds of sacrifices. All right, Rabbi Eliezer basar tochel. What's Rabbi Eliezer going to do with those last words? In the pasuk that the meat is eaten. Amalach mahu mibalel ashe'en habasar mutar ba'achila ad she'yizarek kadam. That's to teach you another law, that you cannot eat the meat until the blood is sprinkled. So you got to do everything in order. First you sprinkle the blood, and then you take the meat and put it on the mizbeach, and then the kohanim can eat it. But you can't eat it before you sprinkle the blood. So good. The Eliezer accounted for everything. Well, if you're going to use the end of the pasuk for that, then maybe you need the entire second half, right? Which teaches you first you do bring the blood, and then you can burn and eat the basar. So since I need the second half of the pasuk all for that, so now I cannot use vedam zevechecha yishafech to teach that I can do the blood without the meat, which is what he used it for. Use that pasuk beforehand. See, so now how are you going to learn your original law to be Eliezer? His answer: Yachi ema kule lahachi. Right, malach. Now, if that was the case, it could have said the other way around. First, eat the meat, and then like in the first half of the pasuk, it says in that order. And so if it just said that way, then I would know that these are separate. So why did it say in the second half dam first? So it says dam first to teach me that I can bring the dam even if there's no meat, and it also teaches that I can en basar mutar b'achila, that I cannot bring the basar until I bring the dam. So since the order could have been otherwise, and I only would have learned one thing, so from the fact that it has this order, I learn both of the laws. And the Rabbi Yehoshua, and basar mutar b'achila she'izarek hadam, how does he know that that law, that principle that the meat can only be brought after the blood, right? How does he know that? Kavachomed who he doesn't learn it. He doesn't need a pasuk for it because he can learn it from Kavachomed. Ma emurin. But they're regarding the insides of the parts of the animal that are burnt. If they don't exist, we lost them, they were destroyed, then they do not preclude bringing the rest of going through with the rest of the sacrifice. When they do exist, however, they do prevent, right? If they do exist, then you do have to put them on the mizbeach in order for the korban to go through. So if that's true for emurin, then dam, the chileta me'akeb, blood, if you lose the blood, then you cannot go through with it at all. So when the blood exists, all the more so that it has to be done first, and only then can you go ahead with sacrificing the meat. So I can learn it from a kavachomed. Okay, now Rabbi Eliezer, why don't you learn from a kavachomed? Rabbi Eliezer, he thinks that even though you're right, I could agree with, I could derive from a kavachomed. Nevertheless, in general, the pasuk sometimes teaches me something, even though I can learn it from a kavachomed. Rabbi Yehoshua kol lechatehilah lemidrash darshinan, and Rabbi Yehoshua says no. If I can learn it from a midrash, then I have to learn it from a midrash. And so therefore, I don't need. I can learn this from a kavachomed, and he accounts for all the rest of the pesukim, all the rest of the parts of the pesukim in his way, and from that he learns that the dam and the meat are mutually dependent. Okay, so now we just showed that we just brought the source for the Yehoshua's point, and that they are mutually dependent. And so now we're ready to answer the question, right? The question again is, the Mishnah mentioned 5 different things that you can eat, you can bring tumah but not eat. But if the blood and the meat are mutually dependent, and the seats does not atone for the parts that are eaten, and these korbanot have parts that are eaten, so then those parts will not be atoned for. And if those parts of the meat are not atoned for, then I should not be allowed to bring the blood either. So I can't bring the korban at all. So how could the Mishnah say I bring them, but the Yehoshua says there's no way for me to bring them? That's the contradiction, or that's the challenge to the Yehoshua. Hashta lema matnitin delak the Yehoshua. Dechavan damar ba'ainan terte. Since the Yehoshua says I need both the blood and the meat to be okay. Vesis achilot lo meraseh, and the sis does not atone for the parts that are eaten. Hechiyate betumah. How can I bring the whole thing, this korban betumah, when not all of it is atoned for? The parts that are eaten are not atoned for. Okay, answer number 1. Afilu tema Rabbi Yehoshua ela kasaba Rabbi Yehoshua sis meraseh al ha'olin. I can even say this Rabbi Yehoshua, and the tzitzis will atone for that part of it that is burnt. Part of the korban is burnt on the mizbeach, and so that's sufficient, and then I can bring the rest of it. All right, hatenach zebachim dikaolin, and that's good for all the animals that are on the list, because there's parts of it go on the mizbeach. But these grain offerings, none of it is brought on the mizbeach. So what are you going to say about that? Okay, the truth is that even in these, you do bring a handful onto the mizbeach, but that's simply an equivalent to the sprinkling of the blood. It's not the equivalent to the parts of the meat that you bring on the mizbeach. So really, the part that we say eaten are all eaten by the kohanim. None of the eaten part it goes onto the mizbeach. And so in this case, none of the eaten part will be atoned for by the seats. And so those 2 items in the Mishnah, the Yehoshua cannot account for. Amre, menahot la'amar. Oh, Well, maybe Rabbi Yehoshua, he says you need both that are mutually dependent. That only is true for animals. But for menahot, he didn't say that. So for menahot, even if the eaten part of the mincha is tameh and not atoned for, it's still okay. You can bring the rest of it on the kimitzah onto mizbeach, and you can still go through. And so that could be. This is answer number one. We reject this answer. Menahot lo amar. Is that true that Rabbi Yehoshua did not say that the two parts of the mincha offering are mutually dependent, and the part that you bring on the mizbeach and the part that you eat? Ve'hatenan in the Mishnah in Menachot 3:4 says nitmeu shiareha abedu shiareha kemidat Rabbi Eliezer keshera kemidat Rabbi Yehoshua pesula. The Mishnah is talking about menachot, mincha offerings, and it says if the rest of it meaning after you put a handful on the mizbeach, the rest of it became tameh or got lost. It says kimidat, right? According to the rule of Rabbi Eliezer, it will be fine because he says you did part of it and that part of it was okay. Just the other part got tameh. That's okay. The kimidat Rabbi Yehoshua, according to the rule, the principle of Rabbi Eliezer, that would be pasul. So you see, it's talking about mincha offering, and yet he says pasul. So this can't be. So Rabbi Eliezer would not agree. We're going to try to answer. Kimidat velo kimidat. He says it says kimidat, like the principle. So maybe the Tana of this Mishnah is just applying it to Rabbi Yehoshua loosely. Kimidat Rabbi Yehoshua de ba'anan tarateh velo kimidat Rabbi Yehoshua de Rabbi Yehoshua bezbachim amar b'menachot lo amar velo haytana sabar afilu b'menachot. Yeah, it's like Rabbi Yehoshua, but also not like Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua actually only said his principle of mutual dependency regarding animal sacrifices, but not regarding mincha. But this Tana of the Tana of this Mishnah applied it also to mincha. So that's why I said like the principle of Rabbi Yehoshua. But Rabbi Yehoshua himself would say that in menachot they're not mutually dependent, and therefore Rabbi Yehoshua can be the author of Mishnah. All right, we don't like this answer. Manu haytana. What?
Sorry. For the shteh lechem and the lechem, there's no part that goes on the mizbeach, right? So these would be different than the regular mincha.
The mincha, there is a part that goes on mizbeach, a kimisa.
So why don't we just say that the kimisa? It's like then can't we just apply the same thing with like the blood and
that kimisa is equivalent to the sprinkling of the blood on the side of the mizbeach. It's not an eaten part.
Yeah, so then we could use the same answer for the menahot like we use for the meat.
You can't, because the meat part of it, at least part of it, is sacrificed, is eaten by the mizbeach. This part of the mincha that you put on mizbeach is not called eaten. It's like sprinkled blood.
Oh, so we have something equivalent to the blood, but not to the meat that's burned.
Right. None of the meat of the mincha is all the leftover dough right after you take the kemisa.
Okay.
And none of that goes on the mizbeach.
Okay.
So we don't really think that there's such a person, that there would be a Tana that who would be this person who is like Rabbi Yehoshua and more machmir than Rabbi Yehoshua. It doesn't make sense. Ve'od Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yoseh, רואה אני את דברי רבי אליעזר במנחות ובזבחים ודברי רבי יהושע בזבחים ומנחות. We're going to quote here a long baraita that we're not going to explain. We're going to explain it tomorrow. But just for now, he says, I see both sides, basically, he seems to be saying, right? I see the point of Rabbi Eliezer regarding menachot and zebachim. And I see the point of Rabbi Yehoshua regarding zebachim and menachot. Well, they both have both. And he specifies, Rabbi Eliezer bezbachim shaya omer dam afal pisha and sham basar. All right, Rabbi Eliezer said regarding sacrifices that you can bring the blood even if the meat is not fit. Rabbi Yehoshua bezbachim shaya omer im en dam en basar. Im en basar en dam. I also understand the point of Rabbi Yehoshua regarding zebachim, that they are mutually dependent. You need the blood and the meat. Rabbi Eliezer menachot. I see the point of Rabbi Eliezer regarding menachot shaya omer kometz afa pisha en sheyarim, that you can bring the kimisa, the fistful, even if the remainder, all the rest of it that usually would eat, is not fit. Rabbi Yehoshua b'menahot she'omed im en komes en shiarim. En shiarim en komes. And I appreciate the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua regarding menahot, that regarding mincha also the part that the handful that you bring and the rest of it that you eat are mutually dependent. So there you go. In this baraita, it's explicit that Rabbi Yehoshua holds his principle both in zevachim and in menachot. So the answer we just said before does not work. Rather, we need a second answer. Ela kasaba Rabbi Yehoshua sis medaseh al haolin ve'al achilot. Right. So we conclude from this whole thing we reject everything above, and in fact, and here's the second answer, that the seats does atone for that which is goes on mizbeach and that which we eat. In other words, the Rabbi Yehoshua must dispute B, right? And so he says, since the seats does atone for everything, that's why it's fine. You can bring, right? The blood and the meat are mutually dependent, but the seats atones for all of the meat, and therefore it's no problem, right? Regarding mincha, also all the meat, all the dough is atoned for, and you can bring it. And so now Rabbi Yehoshua can be the author. Ihachi amai kimidat Rabbi Yehoshua pesula abud v'saruf. Wait, if so, why does it say kimidat Rabbi Yehoshua pesula in the braita that we said above? He said it's not good. So why does it say it's not good? We just said it is good. No, that was talking about when it's destroyed altogether, when it's or lost or burnt. In that case, when you don't have it, the seats cannot help you because you need it to be there. But if it's tameh only and it's there, that's when the seats can help. So the Mishnah is talking about that case where it exists, but it's tameh. Okay. Ella nitma leman kataneh. So nitma leman kataneh. So according to whom is the Mishnah teaching about the mincha offering that became impure, right? Like why does the Mishnah need to teach us anything about this? Rabbi Eliezer, Peshita, hashta yesh lomar abud v'saruf le'letnu machshir, Rabbi Eliezer, nitma de'ite mibaya. According to Rabbi Eliezer, this would be obvious. If when in a case when it's destroyed altogether and there's nothing there, and yet Rabbi Eliezer says it's fine, then all the more so when it only becomes tameh, it's fine. Ela peshita Rabbi Yehoshua v'kataneh pesula. Rather, the entire case must be the case of for Rabbi Yehoshua, right? In other words, that Mishnah in menachot must be teaching us something for Rabbi Yehoshua. And yet it says pesula. So therefore, it seems to be that Rabbi Yehoshua would say pesula also in the case that it became tameh. And so that answer doesn't work. Furthermore, it doesn't work. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehoshua made kol hazebachim shebatorah ben shenitma basar v'cheleb kayam. Ben shenitma cheleb ubasar kayam. Zorek et hadam. So regarding all sacrifices, whether the meat of it is tameh, but the chelev, the part that goes on mizbeach, is fine, or whether the chelev that goes beach is tameh and the meat is fine, you still go ahead with the sacrifice and you sprinkle the blood. But not if both of them became tameh, both the regular meat that you eat and the chelev. So therefore, you see that Rabbi Yehoshua does not think that the seats can atone for both that which goes on the mizbeach and for that which is eaten. So we can't say that he disagrees with assumption B. All right. So now we come to a new answer. Ella. Le'olam Rabbi Yehoshua hi matnitin lakashia kan lechatehilah kan bediabad. Ki amar Rabbi Yehoshua lechatehilah bediabad la. Right. So in this answer, when C says blood and meat are mutually independent, that's lechatehilah. That's true. It has to be. When the Mishnah said that they can be brought in tumah, that means if you have brought them already, then it's okay. But you shouldn't do that in the first place. Right. So do we like this answer? Where do we see that he would make such a distinction? We do see it in the Braita. The Tanya nitma basar o shenifsal o sheyasa chus lakela'im. Rabbi Eliezer omer yizarek. Rabbi Yehoshua omer lo yizarek. Moed Rabbi Yehoshua she'im zarak hursa. So basar, the meat that became tameh, or pasul another way, or you brought it outside of the area. The Eliezer says it's okay. You can still go ahead and sprinkle the blood because the blood is independent of the meat. The Yehoshua says do not do it, but he agrees that if you did it, then it's okay, right? The atonement is okay. So you see that Yehoshua does in fact think that bediabad is okay. But we don't like this answer. Hada de pesula diabad mashma. When he says pisula, when he said in his original statement pisula, he said they're dependent. If otherwise they're pisula, that sounds like even bediabad it would be pasul. Ve'od chamisha devarim ba'im lechatehilah mashma. The Mishnah says these things, 5 things can be brought, which means sounds like you can bring them lechatehilah. So final answer, ela lakashya kan biyachid kan basibur. Mishnah is talking about korban sibur, and there in that case, even lechatehilah, yes, you can bring them. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, do not do it. That you have to. They are mutually dependent. That was only talking about a korban yachid. Okay, and so we'll end with that answer. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.